Twice now, I've been tempted to throw this project away. So I'm giving myself permission to not finish this pattern. Hello, and welcome to Blah Blah Black Sheep, a weekly yarny podcast where I, Sarah Korth of SCK Handmade, talk all things yarny. Today I'm doing an honest pattern review of the Key Largo tee. There's a running joke at my yarn shop that if one of my friends there gets frustrated with a project, no matter how big or small, she just tosses it in the trash. I'll be honest with you, I never understood that feeling until this project. What project is it? It's the Key Largo tee by Brianna Kepner. Now, don't run away just because I said I got frustrated with this. I'm going to take you through the whole process, talk about the yarn, talk about modifications I made, give you my honest review of the pattern, and let you know why I think I'm just done with this pattern for now. So let's talk about my impressions before I even got started with this pattern. How I got here was that Hobbii gifted me some Friends cotton linen yarn last summer. It was such a bold and fun color and a light summer yarn that I thought it would be the perfect thing to make a summer tee out of. I had asked you all what I should make, and you picked the Queen of the Night tee, but when I purchased that pattern and opened it up, I immediately felt overwhelmed. So I went searching for a different pattern to try. Because Hobbii had already gifted me the yarn, I was a little limited on what I could make because I had all the yarn I was going to get, because also at this point, the yarn had been discontinued. So I landed on the Key Largo tee and I was super excited to try out this design. Even from the very beginning, I knew there were a few things I was going to change. I decided I didn't want the longer sleeve on this top, so I was going to keep it to a short sleeve. And I knew that the construction was just rectangle seamed together, and that tight boat neck tee really drives me crazy. So I was going to add a little something to help give the neckline a little more shape. So let's talk about this yarn. I'm not going to go too in depth because this is not a yarn that's available anymore, but it is by Hobbii. It's their Friends cotton linen yarn. If you have some of this, I absolutely loved this color. It is really stunning, and I did enjoy how the color worked up. It is a 50% cotton, 35% viscose, 15% linen mix. So a very summer blend and very much out of my main comfort zone and preference for yarn. It has 174 yards per 50 grams, so these are just little teeny tiny balls. My impression of this yarn is one that I'm not completely surprised about. I had very much a love-hate relationship with it. It's actually very soft for a cotton and a linen yarn. There's not a lot of linen in it, but linen does tend to make yarn a little more stiff, especially before it's washed. So I do like how soft it was. Let me see if I can find you an example. One of the things that I don't love about linen yarn, and let's see if I can show you right there. One of the things I don't love about linen yarn is it has these little fibers. They're kind of hard to see because they're tiny, that are kind of like almost a grassy feel to them, and they stick out a little bit, and it always drives me a little crazy. Now, as I'm going to tell you in just a minute, I frogged with this yarn a whole bunch, and while it did get a little fuzzy, I do think that it held up pretty well to tearing back and reworking with the same yarn. I'll be honest with you though, I think the beginning and end of my review for this is not so much the color, which I loved, but the fact that I did not love this blend of yarn. The finished project is just not what I was hoping for, and honestly, the yarn is probably a big part of the reason that I'm frustrated with this project. So let's talk hooks. There's only one hook that's required for this pattern. The pattern called for a US H or 5mm hook. To meet gauge, I ended up going down just a little bit to a US G plus or a 4.5mm hook. I found that with the fingering weight cotton yarn and the relatively large hook size for the fine yarn, it worked up really fast and really easily for me. I did use a metal hook, which is my general preference, and I found that to glide really nicely over the cotton linen blend yarn. If you're someone who generally prefers a wooden or bamboo hook, you may find that switching to a metal hook with plant fibers like cotton allows that fiber and those stitches to glide really nicely off your hook. Of course, that is all totally personal preference. The other supplies you'll need for this project are minimal. You'll need a tapestry needle, of course, to sew up your seams and weave in your ends, and you're probably going to want to wash and or block your project, so you're gonna need all of the normal blocking supplies. This pattern, however, doesn't have anything that I think would need to be really stretched and pinned, so you're probably okay for blocking as long as you have either some blocking mats or a towel and a nice flat place to lay it out and let it completely dry. All right, let's talk skill level for this pattern. I said before that I think it was mostly my yarn choice that has made me not fall in love with this pattern, but I also do think that this pattern is definitely not for everyone. I would consider this pattern to definitely be an intermediate pattern. It is very bare bones. I remember the very first time I went to sew with a really classic sewing pattern, like a McCall's pattern or a Butterick pattern, and I opened it up and it all seemed like a puzzle with missing pieces. Once I talked to my mom about it, who was a professional tailor, she was like, they are kind of assuming that you know the basics of sewing, which I did not. I would say that this pattern is a lot like those sewing patterns. It assumes that you know some things about how to construct a garment and how to crochet that if you're a beginner or even an advanced beginner, you might find really challenging. So I would say that this is definitely a solidly intermediate pattern. This lace work is actually very well explained. You go from solid patterns to lace work to solid to lace again, and the lace is written out and charted out, which I found incredibly helpful. Now, I will say that I noticed because of the chart that the lace pattern isn't symmetrical on both sides, and that's something I just chose to change up, which again, if you're intermediate and you have some experience, I don't think you would have trouble also doing that. Of course, you can just go with what's written and know that you're not going to be perfectly symmetrical on the beginning and end of your lace patterns. Another thing from the pattern that I think puts it solidly in the intermediate category is that you are not told how to work this first row back into your lace pattern. It's just assumed that you can figure out exactly where you should place your stitches so that you end up with the right number of stitches at the end of your row. Something that someone who has quite a bit of experience with crochet would probably have no problem doing. Of course, if you're more of a beginner or a little less confident in those kinds of things, I'd say this pattern is probably going to be a bit too challenging for you. So who is this pattern not for? I would say, again, it's a solid intermediate pattern. So if you're a beginner and you don't have someone who's more intermediate, whether it's a teacher or someone at a local yarn shop or a friend who could help you out with it, I would say probably not the best place to start. Also, I want to make you aware of the shape of this pattern. This pattern is a bunch of rectangles that are sewn together. There isn't any shaping, which for some people is absolutely fine. But if you're like me and you have a much larger bust, that can be a little bit of a challenge. One of the things that really frustrated me about this pattern was that to get the bust size I wanted, I ended up with a lot of extra fabric on the back. So from the front, I looked like I had a pretty well-fitting top, and from the back, it was all wavy and very sloppy looking. Another thing to consider if you're not comfortable making modifications is that it is a boat neck. The rectangles are just seamed at the top, which you can adjust to make that neckline wider, but it is going to set the front of the neck up high. If that's something you don't like me, then again, this might not be the best pattern for you. So let's talk modifications and tips. As I said, I had absolutely intended to make several modifications to this. One, I was not going to add the sleeves. Once I had the main body of my top done, my plan was to just see what the sleeve looked like and maybe add a few extra rows or a finishing around the sleeve to add just a little bit to it, but not have a long sleeve like was shown on the pattern. My plan also was to wear this over dresses, and so I wanted a very cropped version, which I think I was pretty successful at. And so then my plan was to just add around the bottom enough of a border to get it to the length I really wanted it to be. I mentioned in the beginning that I was making a modification to the shoulders to open up the neckline a little bit, and I want to show you what I did. On each side, I added this little triangle of fabric to open up the neckline and make it more of a square neckline. I think this worked pretty well, but honestly, I've just kind of given up because I made the whole top. It was far too big. I tore it back. I had it, you guys, I had it almost completely done. That was the first time I was ready to throw it in the trash when I put it on, and it was just enormous on me. So I had a friend, my friend Michelle, convince me to tear it back and try again. And I did. And this is my second time starting to reassemble it. I am a classic person who feels like I need to power through a project just to say I've finished it. I do it with books too, where I'll read through a whole entire book I didn't really like. I'm just, as I get older, trying not to do that. All right, so let's talk about my overall and final impressions of the pattern. It was a decent pattern. I could conquer it fairly easily. Again, don't recommend it for very beginners. I don't love the construction. I think between the simple construction and the yarn that I used, this pattern just really didn't work out for me. Would I go back and try it with a wool yarn, which you know is my preference? I don't know. Maybe. I'm not so in love with it. I hate to say that my experience tainted my feelings, but it really did a little bit. Now, my issue currently is that I think this neckline is still too wide. Could that be modified by, again, tearing out these triangles and moving them in a little bit? Yes, probably. But I'm at the point where I don't know that I like this fabric in this yarn enough to keep going on it. So generally speaking, I don't not recommend this pattern. I just want you to know what you're getting into before you start and make sure that you're either excited to tackle something that might be a little more challenging, or that you know you have the skills to dive in and be successful. I do not want you to end up like me and just be frustrated and want to throw it in the trash. I just have one quick announcement. I have a whole collection of patterns coming out next week. If you would like the very best deal and the very best discount code, I highly recommend that you join my email list. Link in the show notes below so that you can sign up for that. Thank you so much for joining me today. All the links to the pattern. I was going to say to the yarn, but I already told you that was discontinued. But link to the pattern and my favorite hooks and all of those sorts of things in the show notes below. Be sure you go check those out. I hope that this honest pattern review helps you decide whether or not this is a pattern you'd like to try. If you found this helpful, I would love it if you would like, subscribe, turn on notifications, and maybe even share it with a friend who maybe thought about making this top. If you have a summer top that you would recommend, I'd love to know what it is. Please comment below. Thank you again for joining me. Until next week, happy crafting.